The envelope stopped right in front of me. No one said anything. Not even him. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment everything quietly breaks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because if I just tell you about the envelope, it sounds simple. Like something small. A misunderstanding maybe. Something people could explain away later. It wasn't. There was this one detail though. I didn't think about it at the time. I mean, I saw it, obviously. It was right there in front of me. The company logo stamped on the corner of the document inside the envelope. It looked slightly off. Older, maybe. I don't know why that stuck with me. I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. Hi. I'm Emma. I didn't think I'd ever actually say this out loud. Not like this. I've gone over that night in my head more times than I can count. Sometimes it plays back clearly. Other times it's just pieces. A sentence here. A look I didn't understand then. Something I should have noticed. And I keep catching things I missed. Like how quiet he was. That part still bothers me. I think I always believed that if something serious ever happened, if someone crossed a line like that, he would say something. But he didn't. And I didn't realize how much that mattered until later. Way later. I guess I should explain how any of this even started. Because none of it felt strange at first. That's the part that's hard to admit. Everything felt normal. I was 23 when I met Daniel. It wasn't anything dramatic. No big moment. No story you'd tell your friends like it was fate or something. We met in a coffee shop. I had just finished a long shift. Well, not a shift exactly, but it felt like one. I was working part-time back then while finishing my degree. Money was tight, but not in a way I talked about. Actually, that's not true. It wasn't just money. I was used to people assuming things about me. And most of the time, I let them. Daniel didn't feel like that at first. He was easy to talk to. Confident. But not in a way that made you feel small. Or maybe I just didn't notice it yet. We ended up sharing a table because the place was crowded. That's how it started. Just two people sitting across from each other because there wasn't anywhere else to sit. We talked for almost an hour. And I remember thinking, this is nice. Simple. Normal. I didn't know his last name meant anything. Not then. That came later. A few weeks in, he mentioned his family. Not in a bragging way. More like, it was just part of his life. Something obvious. Harper, he said. I nodded like it didn't mean anything. Because to me, it didn't. At least not yet. I didn't look it up right away either. Which, looking back, maybe I should have. Or maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. I don't know. But when I finally did search it, late one night, just out of curiosity, I remember sitting there staring at my phone longer than I expected. Harper Industries. I didn't fully understand what they did at first. Something about infrastructure, materials, contracts. But what stood out was the scale. The numbers. The kind of numbers that don't really feel real when you read them. And suddenly, small things started making sense. The watch he wore. The way he talked about work without ever really explaining what that meant. The fact that he never seemed worried about anything practical. I didn't tell him I looked it up. I just kept acting the same. I think that was the first decision that mattered. Not saying anything. Because I wanted to see something. I didn't have a name for it back then, but I think now I do. I wanted to know if he would treat me the same if he thought I had nothing to offer him. No status. No connections. No value, in the way his world seemed to measure it. And for a while. He did. Or at least. I thought he did. There's one thing I keep coming back to though. It didn't feel important at the time. Just a small moment. Something he said one night without really thinking about it. I like that you're not complicated. I laughed when he said it. I thought it was a compliment. Maybe it was. But I found out later it wasn't the first time he had said something like that. And that changes what it meant. But that's not even the part that hurt the most. Not even close. Because the first real sign? It didn't happen in that coffee shop. It happened much later. At a dinner table. With an envelope. And a silence that said more than anything anyone actually said out loud. If I'm being honest, nothing about the beginning felt wrong. That's probably the part that's hardest to admit now. Because when you look back on something like this, you want there to be obvious signs. Big ones. The kind you can point to and say, there, that's where it started. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter. Slower. Almost. Reasonable. Daniel and I kept seeing each other after that first day. Coffee turned into dinners, dinners turned into weekends, and somewhere in between, we just became part of each other's routine. He worked a lot. I mean, really worked. Long hours, constant calls, emails even late at night. I used to tease him about it, like, do you ever actually stop? He'd just smile and say, that's how this world works. At the time, I didn't question what this world meant. I think I just assumed it was his job. But now, I'm not so sure. Because the more time I spent with him, the more I noticed little differences between us. Not in a bad way, exactly. Just things. Like the way he never checked prices. Or how he talked about people. Not directly. Never rude. But there was always this quiet categorizing. Like he could tell where someone belonged just by looking at them. I remember one time we were walking past a small restaurant. Nothing fancy. The kind of place I liked. I said, we should try that sometime. And he paused, just for a second, and then said, yeah, maybe. We never went. It didn't feel like a big deal then. Now it does. There was also the way he talked about his parents. That should have been my second clue. He didn't talk about them often, but when he did, his tone changed slightly. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. Respect, maybe. Or expectation. They're particular, he told me once. I remember laughing a little. I thought he meant strict or traditional or something like that. I said, about what? And he just shrugged. Everything. That was it. I didn't push. I probably should have. Because when someone says everything, they usually mean more than they're saying. But again, it didn't feel urgent. Nothing did. Even when he saw my apartment for the first time. It was small. Simple. I didn't try to make it look like something it wasn't. He stood in the doorway for a second longer than I expected. Not in a judgmental way. Just observing. Then he smiled. It's nice, he said. And I believed him. But later that night, he added something. You're really low maintenance. I laughed again. That seemed like a good thing. Right. I didn't realize how much that word mattered. Low maintenance. Easy. Simple. All of it pointed to something I wasn't fully seeing yet. And I wonder now. I really do. If I was the only one who just accepted it like that. Like, have you ever had someone define you in a way that felt positive at the time, but later you realize it put you in a box? I keep thinking about that. Because I didn't question it. Not once. And that might have been my mistake. Things kept moving forward though. Naturally. Or at least, it felt natural. We met each other's friends, well, mostly mine. His circle was harder to access. People from his firm, business connections. I met a few of them, but it always felt slightly formal. Like I was being observed. Not judged outright. Just noted. I told myself I was overthinking. I always do that. At least, that's what I used to say. But there was one moment I can't ignore anymore. It was small. So small I almost forgot it happened. We were at dinner, just the two of us, and the bill came. I reached for it out of habit. And he stopped me. Not aggressively. Just quick. I've got it, he said. I smiled. I know, but I can. No, he interrupted. Still calm. Still polite. But firm. Then he added, almost casually, I prefer it this way. Prefer. That word stayed with me. Because it wasn't about kindness. It was about control. I didn't see that then. I just nodded and let it go. Because that's what I kept doing. Letting things go. Letting small moments pass. letting assumptions stay unchallenged. And the truth is, I think part of me liked it. The simplicity. The idea that I didn't have to prove anything. That I could just exist. But there's something else I haven't said yet. Something that keeps coming back to me the more I think about all of this. There was one thing Daniel never did. Not once. He never asked about my family. Not really. He knew basic things. Where I grew up. What I studied. But he never dug deeper. At the time, I thought that meant he respected my privacy. Now, I think it meant something else. Because I found out later. It wasn't that he wasn't curious. It's that he thought he already knew the answer. And that changes everything. But even that wasn't the moment things broke. Not yet. Because for a while, everything still felt okay. Almost too okay. And that should have been enough to make me stop and ask. Why? But I didn't. Not until the night he finally said something that shifted everything just a little. Not enough to scare me. Just enough to plant a question I couldn't ignore anymore. My parents want to meet you. And I remember thinking, why now? When Daniel said it, he tried to make it sound casual. Like it wasn't a big deal. My parents want to meet you. Just that. No build-up. No explanation. And I remember pausing for a second, not because I was nervous, but because something about the timing felt off. Now? I asked. He smiled a little. Yeah. They've been busy. Traveling. You know how it is. I nodded like that made sense. Maybe it did. But I don't know. Looking back, I think that was the first moment I felt something shift. Just slightly. Like a small crack in something that had been smooth until then. I didn't say no. Of course I didn't. That would have been strange. We'd been together long enough. Meeting his parents was expected. Normal. So I said yes. And for a few days, I didn't think much about it. That's the part that still surprises me. I went about my routine. Classes. Work. Seeing him in the evenings. Everything felt steady. Almost like the conversation hadn't even happened. But then, a couple days before the dinner, he said something else. We were sitting in his car. Engine off. Just talking. And he adjusted his watch. He does that when he's thinking, and then said, "They're a little traditional." I smiled. Okay. And they care about certain things. I tilted my head slightly. Like what? He hesitated. Just for a second. Then he shrugged. Background. Stability. That kind of stuff. Background. That word again. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I ignored it. I told myself he was just preparing me. Giving me context. People do that, right? Warn you a little before introducing you to their parents. It didn't have to mean anything more than that. So I nodded. I'll survive, I said lightly. He laughed. But not fully. And that should have told me something. Because laughter usually comes easy to him. Except, not then. Still, I didn't push. I didn't ask what exactly they expected. Or what he had already told them about me. I think part of me didn't want to know. Because as long as I didn't ask, everything could stay simple. Or at least, it could feel simple. That's the thing about false reassurance. It's not loud. It's quiet. Convincing. You build it yourself, piece by piece, until it feels solid enough to stand on. Even when it isn't. The day of the dinner came faster than I expected. I remember standing in front of my closet, staring at my clothes longer than I needed to. Nothing felt right. Everything suddenly seemed too much or not enough. Too casual. Too plain. I changed 3 times. Which I don't usually do. That alone should have told me I was more affected than I wanted to admit. When Daniel picked me up, he looked different. Same as always. Technically. Same clean-cut appearance. Same calm expression. But there was tension in the way he held himself. Subtle. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking. I think I was starting to look. You look nice, he said. Thanks. He nodded, then looked back at the road. Silence. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just heavier than usual. About halfway through the drive, I asked, "What did you tell them about me?" He didn't answer right away. That pause again. That half-second delay that had started to feel familiar. "Just the basics," he said. "Like, school, work." That was it. He didn't elaborate. And I didn't ask him to. I just nodded and looked out the window. But something about that answer stayed with me. Because it wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't say. He didn't mention my family. Not once. And I realized something then. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to feel it. He had already decided what mattered. And what didn't. The house was exactly what you'd expect. Large. Quiet. Perfect. The kind of place that feels more like a statement than a home. Lights soft. Everything in place. Nothing out of line. I remember stepping inside and thinking, I don't belong here. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet observation. Like noticing you're underdressed for something you didn't realize was formal. His mother greeted me first. Polite. Controlled. Measured. She looked me over quickly. Not rudely. Just efficiently. His father followed. Firm handshake. Direct eye contact. Assessing. That's the word. Dinner started normally. Conversation. Small talk. Questions. Where I studied, what I did. Future plans. I answered honestly. Simple answers. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing hidden either, at least, not intentionally. And for a while. It felt okay. Almost like I had been wrong to worry. Like everything was going to be fine. That was the false calm. The moment where everything softens just enough for you to believe. Maybe you imagined the tension. Maybe it was never there. But there was one thing I kept coming back to. A question I didn't realize I was asking myself until much later. Why were they so certain? Not curious. Not cautious. Certain. I didn't understand it yet. But I found out later. This wasn't their first time making a decision about someone like me. And that's when things stopped being subtle. Because what happened next wasn't a question. It wasn't even a conversation. It was a decision. Already made. And I was the last person to know about it. Dinner didn't fall apart all at once. That's what I expected when I replay it now. Some clear turning point, a moment where everything shifts and you can say that's when it went wrong. But it didn't happen like that. It stayed calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that feels controlled. Planned. His mother asked questions. His father listened more than he spoke. Daniel kept the conversation moving whenever there was even a hint of silence. It almost worked. Almost. Because if you didn't look too closely, it felt like a normal dinner. That was the first wave. The part where nothing is technically wrong, but something underneath it feels slightly off. Like everyone else is following a script you haven't seen. I remember his father asking about my work. What do you see yourself doing long term? I answered honestly. I always do. I'm still figuring that out. He nodded slowly. Not dismissive. Just unconvinced. And then his mother added, almost gently. Stability becomes more important over time. Stability. Another word. Another quiet category. I smiled. I didn't argue. Because arguing would have made it real. And I think part of me still believed this was just adjustment. Different worlds trying to understand each other. That's what I told myself. That was the gap. The space between the first wave and what came next. Because for a few minutes after that, everything softened again. They asked about small things. Food. Travel. Even Daniel joined in more, like he was trying to smooth everything out. And I let myself relax. Just a little. That was my mistake. Because the second wave didn't come with a warning. It came quietly. His mother stood up first. "Excuse me," she said, and left the room. Nothing unusual about that. People step away during dinner all the time. I didn't think anything of it. I kept talking. Answering questions. Trying to stay present. But when she came back, she wasn't empty-handed. She handed something to his father. And he didn't look at it. He didn't check it. He already knew what it was. That's when something inside me shifted. Not fear. Not yet. Just awareness. Like my brain finally catching up to something my body had already sensed. He placed it on the table. Carefully. Deliberately. And then he slid it toward me. That was the moment. The one I keep coming back to. The one that doesn't feel real, even now. Because no one said anything. Not right away. And I remember looking at it, not touching it yet, just looking. Waiting for someone to explain. To laugh. To say it was something else. But no one did. His father leaned back slightly. Composed. Confident. This is just a practical solution, he said. Practical. I think that word hurt more than anything else. Because it meant they didn't see this as emotional. Or complicated. Or even personal. Just practical. I picked up the envelope slowly. My hands didn't shake. I noticed that later. I expected them to. But they didn't. Inside. There was a check. And a document. I didn't need to read every word to understand it. It was clear enough. A separation agreement. Clean. Quiet. Final. I looked up. At Daniel. And this is the part one didn't understand then. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't confused. He just sat there. Silent. Like this was something he had already accepted. That was the second wave. Not the envelope. Not the money. Him. The realization that this wasn't happening to him. It was happening with him. I think that's when something inside me actually broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a shift. A quiet, irreversible understanding. And I almost said yes. That's the part one don't like admitting. I didn't say it out loud. But for a second. Just one. I thought about how easy it would be. Take the check. Walk away. No conflict. No explanation. Just done. That thought scared me more than anything else. Because it meant they weren't completely wrong about one thing. They thought everything could be reduced to a transaction. And for a second, I almost proved them right. I need to stop here for a second. Because there's something I didn't explain before. Something that changes how all of this looks. I didn't grow up the way they thought I did. Not exactly. I wasn't struggling. I wasn't trying to climb into their world. I had already been around it. Just quietly. A few years ago, before I met Daniel, my parents took me to a meeting. I didn't even understand what it was at the time. Just a room full of people in suits. Discussions I didn't fully follow. Numbers that didn't feel real. And at one point, someone handed me a document. Told me to sign. I did. I didn't ask questions. I trusted them. I always have. I didn't think about that moment again for a long time. Not until that dinner. Not until I saw the name on that document inside the envelope. Harper Industries. That's when it clicked. Not fully. But enough. Enough to realize. This wasn't just their company. And maybe, just maybe, they didn't understand it as well as they thought they did. But that wasn't the part that hurt the most. Not yet. Because I still hadn't decided what I was going to do next. I didn't answer them right away. That's something I keep replaying in my head, how quiet it got after I opened the envelope. Not tense. Not chaotic. Just still. Like they were giving me space to accept something that had already been decided. I remember placing the paper back inside carefully. Not folding it wrong. Not rushing. Just controlled. And that's when I noticed it again. That logo. Same one from before. Slightly outdated. The edges sharper. The font, older somehow. I didn't know why it bothered me. But it did. Because if this was something they had prepared today, why did it look like something from years ago? That was the first time I felt something different. Not hurt. Not confusion. Clarity. Small. Incomplete. But there. Like a thread I could pull. I slid the envelope back across the table, right to where it came from. I'm not signing this. My voice didn't shake. I thought it would. It didn't. His mother's expression didn't change much. His father's didn't either. They were prepared for resistance, just not for refusal. This doesn't have to be difficult, his father said calmly. It already is. That came out before I had time to think about it. And then, I looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. Waiting. Giving him one more chance to say something. Anything. But he didn't. And I think, that was the moment I stopped waiting for him. Not completely. But enough. Enough to understand that whatever happened next, I would have to decide it on my own. We're trying to avoid complications, his mother added softly. Complications. That word again. Everything reduced to something manageable. Predictable. Controllable. I nodded slowly. I understand. And I did. That's the strange part. I understood exactly what they were doing. Why they were doing it. But understanding something doesn't make it right. And it definitely doesn't make it acceptable. I stood up. Not suddenly. Just, deliberately. And for a second, I thought that would be it. That I would walk out. That this would end in the simplest way possible. But I didn't move. I stayed there. Because there was something else. Something forming in the back of my mind. That meeting. That document I signed years ago. And the way his father had said our company earlier that night. So certain. So absolute. I looked at him. Can I ask you something? He nodded. How long have you been using that version of your company's legal documents? That caught him off guard. Not completely. But enough. I'm not sure what you mean. I gestured lightly toward the envelope. The logo. It's not current. A pause. Small. But real. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't just about a dinner or a decision or a misunderstanding. There was something deeper here. Something they hadn't considered. Or maybe, something they had forgotten. And suddenly, the entire situation felt different. Not resolved. Not even close. But shifted. Like the ground underneath, it wasn't as stable as it looked. I took a breath. And for the first time that night, I wasn't reacting. I was thinking. Clearly. Slowly. What exactly are you offering me? I asked. His father frowned slightly. A clean exit. No, I said. That's what you think you're offering. I could feel Daniel watching me now. Really watching. Like he was seeing something he hadn't before. And maybe that was part of it. Maybe this wasn't just about them. Maybe it was about him finally understanding something too. But I wasn't sure yet. And that uncertainty. That's where things got complicated. Because I had a choice. And this is the part I've gone back and forth on the most. Even now. I could have told them everything right there. Explained who my parents were. What they owned. What that meeting actually meant. I could have ended it in one sentence. Changed the entire dynamic instantly. But I didn't. And I keep asking myself. Was that the right decision? Or was I just delaying something inevitable? Because part of me knew. If I said it there, in that moment, it would turn into something else. Not understanding. Not reflection. Just damage control. And I didn't want that. I didn't want them to treat me differently because they suddenly had to. I wanted them to understand why they should have from the beginning. But is that fair? I don't know. That's the part I'm still not sure about. Because maybe I had information that could have prevented all of this. Maybe I let it go too far. Maybe I let them go too far. I think about that a lot. So instead of explaining, I did something else. I'll think about it, I said. Which wasn't entirely true. But it wasn't a lie either. Because I wasn't thinking about the offer. I was thinking about what needed to happen next. And they seemed satisfied with that. Relieved, even. Like the situation was back under control. Like things would resolve quietly. Predictably. But as I walked out of that house, I realized something. They weren't the only ones who had made a decision. I had too. I just hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Daniel. And especially not them. Because the next step wasn't going to happen at a dinner table. It was going to happen somewhere else. Somewhere they wouldn't expect. And when it did, there was no way to keep things quiet anymore. The boardroom was colder than I expected. Not physically. Just in the way people carried themselves. Controlled. Precise. Like every movement had already been rehearsed. I stood just outside the glass doors for a second longer than I needed to. Watching. There were about 10 people inside already. Suits. Laptops. Quiet conversations that stopped the moment someone else spoke. Daniel was there. Halfway down the table. Focused on a stack of papers like nothing else existed. For a second, I almost turned around. Not because I was scared of them. But because I wasn't sure what this would do. To him. To us. That was the near miss. That moment where I thought. Maybe I should have just let it go. Taken the easier path. Stayed quiet. But then I remembered the envelope. The silence. And the way he didn't look at me. So I opened the door. And everything stopped. It's strange how quickly a room can go quiet. Conversations don't fade, they just end. All at once. Every head turned. Not toward me at first. Toward the man walking in beside me. My father. He didn't look like he belonged there. Not in the way they defined belonging. Old jacket. Simple posture. No urgency. But there was something else. Something you couldn't ignore once you noticed it. He wasn't there to ask for anything. He was there because he already had a place. One of the executives stood up slightly. Confused. Then someone whispered something. And I watched it happen. Recognition. It moved across the room like a ripple. Quiet. But unmistakable. Daniel looked up. And this time. He did look at me. Really look. Not confused. Not dismissive. Just trying to understand something that no longer made sense to him. My father walked to the table calmly. Set a folder down. Didn't rush. Didn't announce anything. I believe this is the quarterly meeting, he said. Simple. Neutral. But it landed. Harder than anything loud could have. One of the attorneys cleared his throat. Yes, of course. Mr. Carter. That name. It shifted everything. I saw it on Daniel's face. The exact moment it connected. Like pieces rearranging too quickly. Emma, he said quietly. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because this wasn't the moment for explanations. This was the moment for understanding. My father took a seat. I sat beside him. Across the table, Daniel's father, Robert, stood still for just a second too long. Then he recovered. Professional. Controlled. Mr. Carter, he said, we weren't aware you would be attending. My father nodded slightly. I like to stay informed. That was it. No accusation. No reference to dinner. Nothing direct. But the room felt different now. Sharper. Like everyone suddenly realized there was more happening than they had been told. The meeting started. Or at least, it tried to. People spoke. Numbers were mentioned. Reports were presented. But no one was really focused. Because the real conversation wasn't being said out loud. It was sitting there. Between us. Waiting. About halfway through, one of the board members asked a question about shareholder structure. Routine. Standard. Except. This time, the answer mattered. The attorney hesitated before responding. Then said it clearly. Mr. Carter currently holds the largest private stake in the company. Silence. Again. But this time. It was heavier. Different. Because now it wasn't just tension. It was realization. I didn't look at Daniel right away. I didn't want to see it too soon. That moment when everything he thought he understood shifted. But I felt it. The way his attention locked onto me. Trying to reconcile two versions of the same person. The one he thought he knew. And the one sitting here now. And in the middle of all that. Something hit me. A question I hadn't fully let myself ask until then. Did I go too far? I mean, I could have told him. At any point. Before the dinner. After the dinner. Even that morning. I chose not to. I let it reach this point. This public exposure. And sitting there, in that room, I realized. This wasn't just about them learning a lesson anymore. This was something else. Something bigger. And maybe messier. The meeting ended not long after that. Not abruptly. Just unfocused. Like no one could fully return to what they had been doing before. People gathered their things. Spoke quietly. Avoided eye contact in a way that felt intentional. Then it was just us. Again. But this time. The balance was completely different. No envelope. No assumptions. Just truth. Sitting there. Unavoidable. And Daniel finally stood up. Took a step toward me. Like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to anymore. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Not angry. Not accusing. Just trying to understand. And I looked at him. Really looked. And realized something. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the point where everything actually had to be decided. For real. No assumptions. No roles. Just us. And I still didn't know what I was going to say. For a second, I didn't answer him. Not because I didn't have one. But because I had too many. And none of them felt simple anymore. "Why didn't you tell me?" It sounded like a straightforward question. But it wasn't. Not really. Because if I answered honestly, I'd have to say things that didn't just explain me. They would expose him too. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. "I didn't think it mattered," I said finally. That wasn't the whole truth. But it wasn't a lie either. He frowned slightly. "It matters now." I nodded. "I know." The room felt different without everyone else in it. Quieter. But heavier. Like everything that had been held back during the meeting was still there. Just waiting to be said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Something he only did when he didn't have control of a situation. "I look like an idiot," he said under his breath. That caught me off guard. Because that wasn't what I expected him to say. Not "you hurt me." Not "why did you hide it." Just that. And for a second, I saw him differently. Not as the person who stayed silent at that table. Not as the one who let it happen. Just someone realizing he had misunderstood something important. Still, that didn't undo anything. "It's not about that," I said. He looked up at me. "Then what is it about?" I hesitated. Because this was the part that mattered. The part where I couldn't stay neutral anymore. "It's about the fact that you didn't say anything." His expression shifted. Subtle. But real. "I didn't know what they were going to do," he said quickly. I held his gaze. "But you didn't stop them when you did." Silence. Again. But this one felt different. Less controlled. More honest. He didn't argue. Didn't defend himself right away. And that mattered more than anything he could have said. "I thought," he started, then stopped. Tried again. "I thought they were just going to talk to you." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. But because it sounded so small compared to what actually happened. And when they didn't. He didn't answer. Because there wasn't a good answer. And we both knew it. We stood there like that for a moment. Not arguing. Not resolving anything. Just acknowledging what had already happened. And then something shifted again. But softer this time. His father stepped forward. I hadn't even realized he was still standing there. Watching. Listening. He looked different too. Less certain. Less composed. Not weak. Just aware. "I owe you an apology," he said. Direct. No hesitation. I blinked. Because I wasn't expecting that. Not from him. Not like this. "For what?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "For assuming I understood you." That wasn't the answer I thought I'd get. I expected something about the envelope. Or the situation. But this was something else. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something human in him. Not the man at the head of a company. Not the one making decisions at a dinner table. Just a person realizing he got something wrong. It didn't fix anything, but it changed the way it felt. Slightly. And that confused me. Because part of me wanted to hold on to the anger. The clarity of it. But moments like that, they make things complicated. More real. More difficult to reduce to right and wrong. Daniel looked between us. Then back at me. I should have said something, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I know. Another pause. But this one didn't feel empty. Just unfinished. And I realized something then. This wasn't going to resolve in one conversation. Or one apology. Or even one decision. Some things don't. Some things just stay open. And you have to decide whether you're willing to live with that. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. Daniel nodded. I don't either. And for once, that didn't feel like avoidance. It felt real. We walked out of the building together. Not side by side exactly. But not separate either. Just somewhere in between. That space where something hasn't ended. But hasn't been fixed yet either. As we reached the parking lot, he stopped. Are you leaving? He asked. I looked at him. Really looked. At the uncertainty. The effort. The fact that, for the first time, he wasn't assuming anything. I don't know, I said again. And this time, I meant it completely. Because the truth is, I wasn't deciding whether to stay because of the money. Or the company. Or even his parents. I was deciding whether I could trust him again. And that's not something you figure out in a day. Even now, I'm not sure I fully have. And maybe that's the part people don't like in stories like this. There's no clean ending. No perfect resolution. Just a choice that keeps unfolding. One conversation at a time. I've thought about that night more than anything else. Not just the dinner. Not just the boardroom. But everything in between. All the small moments I didn't question. All the things I explained away because they felt easier to accept than to challenge. And I keep coming back to the same realization. It wasn't just about them misjudging me. It was about how long I let that version of me exist without correcting it. Not because I was ashamed. Not really. But because it was simpler. There's something strangely comforting about being underestimated. People expect less from you. They don't look too closely. They don't question your place in their world. And for a while, I think I liked that. I liked being easy. Low maintenance. Not complicated. But those words, they come with a cost. Because eventually, people stop seeing you as someone with depth. They start seeing you as something defined. Limited. And once that happens, it's hard to change it without breaking something. I didn't realize that at the time. Or maybe I did, and I just ignored it. I'm still not sure. Daniel and I still talk. That surprises people when I say it out loud. They expect a clear answer. Yes or no. Stayed or left. But it's not that simple. It never really is. Some days feel normal. Almost like before. We go for coffee. We talk about things that have nothing to do with any of this. And for a moment, it feels like we're just us again. Other days, it's different. Quieter. More careful. Like we're both aware of something sitting between us that hasn't fully settled yet. And maybe it never will. I used to think that meant something was broken. Now, I think it just means something changed. And we're still figuring out what that change looks like. His parents haven't tried to contact me again. Not directly. I don't know if that's out of respect. Or discomfort. Or something else entirely. And honestly, I don't know which one I'd prefer. Because part of me wants closure. A clear conversation. Something that ties everything together in a way that makes sense. But another part of me knows. Real life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes people learn something. And they just carry it forward quietly. Without saying it out loud. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. I still haven't decided. There's one thing I've stopped doing though. I don't shrink myself anymore. Not to make things easier. Not to fit into someone else's version of who I should be. And that change, it didn't come from anger. Or even from that moment at the table. It came from realizing something much simpler. If people are going to misunderstand you, let it be because they didn't take the time to know you. Not because you made it easier for them to guess. That's the difference. And it's bigger than it sounds. Sometimes I wonder, if I had told Daniel everything from the beginning, would any of this have happened? Would that dinner have been different? Would he have spoken up sooner? Or would it have just been a different version of the same thing? I don't know. And I think I've stopped trying to answer that. Because some questions don't lead anywhere useful. They just keep you stuck in a version of the past that doesn't exist anymore. What matters is what I see now. What I understand now. And what I'm willing to accept going forward. So I guess the real question isn't about him. Or his parents. Or even that envelope. It's this. Have you ever let someone decide who you are, just because it felt easier than correcting them? So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Emma voice travels. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. People don't show you who you are, they show you who they think you are. The rest is up to you.